All right. Now, there'll be a lot of people watching us tonight who are irregular viewers of the program. There will be people who are half listening and people looking for the smallest little proof that we're okay with what happened on the weekend. Can I speak on behalf of myself? I'm going to be utterly consistent. I said this during the lockdown protests for Black Lives Matter last year, and I'll say it for the freedom protests that happened this weekend. For those that are half paying attention, let me make it nice and clear to you. No protests during a lockdown, okay? We are not supposed to do this stuff because there's a chance of it spreading the disease, which gives the authorities more of a chance to extend lockdowns, which of course is the thing you're campaigning against. Now, these crowds, they were a little different than what took place last year, but still, they were crowds who turned up in the middle of a lockdown. This is what was happening yesterday and today in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And as you know, this is what was taking place last year when it came to Black Lives Matter protests. Now, there'll be some clever dicks that will try to pretend that there wasn't a lockdown. That was true for the Sydney protests last year, but that wasn't true for the Victorian protests last year. In June of last year, the exact same lockdown rules that exist now existed then. So it isn't apples and oranges, it's apples and apples. No protests during a lockdown. But what about the way that the protests are, well, viewed then versus viewed now? Why weren't people arrested last year when they were breaking a lockdown, but they were arrested this weekend for breaking a lockdown? Well, all we have to do is check the tape. Here's Chairman Daniel Andrews saying what he said about BLM and that it was all a bit too hard.
It's simply not feasible to be fining people or to be arresting people for breaking the COVID rules, particularly given that there may be many thousands of people at this protest.
There's a real risk of this getting out of hand if they were to try and apply all those rules.
Because there was just too many of them, we couldn't police the rules? What crap. The police, this is what they said at the time about people breaking a lockdown.
I want to be very clear in saying that Victoria Police understands and acknowledges the anger and frustration people feel. We absolutely understand the sentiment and the anger that lies behind that, and we're very keen to support community here in giving voice to their concerns and their protest, and protesters are able to lawfully exercise their right to protest.
But when it comes to this weekend's protests, were there too many to be fined or policed? What do you think Daniel Andrews said when it was a cause he doesn't support?
If you are not persuaded by me on the issue of protests being, frankly, evil, then go and have a talk to the family of that poor woman who's died, otherwise healthy, struck down in the prime of her life. But, you know, we can't vaccinate against selfishness, and these people should be ashamed, absolutely ashamed. It's just wrong.
And the police in 2021 as opposed to thoughts and feelings of 2020.
Where we can identify those people, we will knock on their door, we will ask them to explain themselves, and if they weren't there for a permitted reason, within their 5Ks and presumably exercise or shopping, they were there protesting, we will issue them with a fine.
Where was this stuff last year? I am utterly consistent with where I was last year. No protests during a lockdown. Because, as health experts are telling us about what took place this weekend, there could be potential super spreader events. These are what is being said right now about what we've seen over the weekend, that Nobel Prize winning immunologists are worried about what's going to happen here. Also, taxpayer media, well, they're very worried that this could have been a super spreader event. But of course, last year, the super spreader event was actually supported by doctors in the United States, with thousands of them saying that social justice was just as serious an issue as COVID-19. This is Goldilocks stuff. Groups of people en masse, maskless and shouting is either a bad thing because of spread, or, depending on the cause, it's a good thing. Oh, by the way, taxpayer media back then, no evidence that protests were part of any sort of COVID-19 surge in Melbourne. The people who work for taxpayer television, well, their attitudes, again, surprisingly different. 12 months either side. Can I repeat? Can I be consistent? No protest then, no protest now. But this one says that they're genuinely shocked that there are many stupid people to protest and a virus that might kill them. My brain hurts. But what did the same person say about the BLM protests 12 months ago?
Health advice was crystal clear that mass gatherings were not safe and shouldn't go ahead. But that's just part of the story, David. Why did Aboriginal people decide to defy that advice? I'll tell you why, because they told me and they made it crystal clear at the protest, because you don't get many chances to elevate an issue like this.
Oh, so you were willing to hear them out? I look forward to that coverage tomorrow, that non-judgmental stuff. But of course, it won't be there. Then, of course, there's the political reactions, like Sarah Hanson-Young, who tweeted just a few months ago that South Australian police have given an exemption to allow Black Lives Matter rally in Adelaide. Meanwhile, in New South Wales, the government is taking its own citizens to court to stop peaceful protest. What the? Proud and thankful of being in South Australia today. Well, of course, South Australia, that is locked down 12 months later. The selfish idiots who put everybody's health at risk yesterday did so in an environment where their anti-vax and aggro attitudes against COVID health response, here we go, are regularly promoted on Sky News. The Murdoch media again legitimising dangerous anti-science whack jobs. Which brings us to Karen Rudd, the former Prime Minister and the man who will never be as loved as Julia Gillard, no matter how hard he tries. Well, he again was pretending that it's all part of some sort of media conspiracy when he decided to show a cartoon of Johannes Leeks, I think, which mocks lockdowns, then compares it with the front pages today of people who are understandably frustrated by the idiots who protested yesterday. Now, what is all of this going to be? There's going to be a lot of bored people with a lot of access to Twitter or the chance to write an opinion piece who didn't say 12 months ago that protests in a lockdown are bad because they are super spreading events regardless of what the cause is, but they will try to make what happened this weekend Australia's version of January the 6th in Washington, D.C. Let me explain. These will be people who will use their columns to try to turn around and say that the politicians that they don't like or the media outlets that they don't like are somehow responsible for people going too far, for people breaking the law or people being violent. Does that surprise you? But this has been the playbook of the left, both at the political and the media level, since the scenes of January 6, 2021. When people who were so beloving of Donald Trump tried to stop the official certification of the results that made Joe Biden the President of the United States. Now, you can disagree with every word that Donald Trump had to say or the people who agreed with him on television, but the idea that they are single-handedly responsible for what happened, well, of course, it's not true. But if you can pump these events up to be something as big as September 11 or January 6, look for the same to happen in Australia in the next little while. But let me also make this point, because while there should be no protests during a lockdown, said it this year, said it last year, you can simultaneously hold that belief and also understand that there are many victims of a lockdown, many victims that are ignored by the rest of the media, are papered over by many of our so-called leaders, and you're allowed in a free country to point this out. Not in a protest, not by what happened on the weekend, but certainly on our airwaves here, where we'll stick up for the common sense. Because, according to the Herald Sun today, yet more evidence that Victorian businesses have been going to the wall even harder because of their fifth lockdown. The number of kids that are ringing the Kids Helpline just this month to report the abuse that they are suffering in homes that they are locked in because none can go to school. You're allowed to point that out. And you're also allowed to point out that thousands of kids never return to school in places like New South Wales and particularly regional New South Wales after last year's lockdowns. So one last time for everyone who's half paying attention. No protest during lockdowns, no matter how hardcore you are, no matter what you believe in, because it puts at risk our communities. It could produce a super spreading event. But of course, it doesn't really matter to those that will be all on their high horse over the next couple of days who said nothing 12 months ago about this. This will instantly turn into a stupid, pointless, partisan conversation about what side they like or don't like, what media they think should or shouldn't exist. Well, you know that on this program, every night, we try to talk about the people who are forgotten and we try to expose the tricks of those who offer up distraction to not talk about people.